The final eviction notice, a slash of salmon pink against the mountain of white bills, felt like a physical blow. Alara sank onto the worn floral sofa, her head in her hands. The silence of the tiny apartment was broken only by the soft, rhythmic breathing of her 1-year-old twins, Leo and Lily, asleep in their shared crib in the corner. Their peacefulness was a stark, painful contrast to the frantic panic clawing at her throat. She had failed them. She pulled up her banking app on her cracked phone screen, the numbers glaring back with brutal finality. $7.32. Enough for a single can of formula, perhaps, but not for the rent, not for the electricity bill that was also threatening disconnection, and certainly not for the mountain of debt that loomed over her like a tidal wave. Her freelance graphic design work, once a steady trickle, had dried up completely over the past 2 months. Clients were ghosting her, projects were being canceled, and her desperate emails went unanswered. Pride had kept her from asking her parents for help. They were retired and living on a fixed income, and she couldn't bear to add her burdens to theirs. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and useless. She had been so determined to do this on her own, to prove she was strong enough to raise her children without the man who had vanished the moment she told him she was pregnant. But determination didn't pay the bills. It didn't put food on the table. With a shaky sigh, she opened her laptop. The screen was a graveyard of rejected applications and polite, automated emails thanking her for her interest. She scrolled through job boards with a kind of numb desperation, her heart sinking with each requirement she didn't meet, each salary that wouldn't even cover childcare. Then she saw it. A listing for a junior creative associate at Ethelred Innovations. The name alone was intimidating. They were titans of the tech and design world, famous for their sleek, revolutionary products and their impossibly high standards. The job description was a laundry list of qualifications she barely possessed and software she hadn't used in years. But the salary listed was a lifeline, a number so far beyond her current reality it seemed like a typo. It was a long shot, a shot in the dark during a hurricane, but it was the only shot she had left. With nothing to lose but the last dregs of her hope, she updated her dusty resume, attached a portfolio of her best, albeit small-time, freelance work, and wrote a cover letter that she hoped sounded more confident than desperate. She clicked submit and closed the laptop, the sound of the soft click echoing the finality of a prayer whispered into the void. 2 days later, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was another debt collector, but something made her answer. "Is this Alara Vance?" a crisp, professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she," Alara managed, her heart beginning to pound a nervous rhythm against her ribs. "This is Amelia from Human Resources at Ethelred Innovations. We received your application for the Junior Creative Associate position. Mr. Ethelred was very impressed with your portfolio and would like to see you for an interview. Are you available tomorrow at 10 in the morning?" Alara's mind went blank. Mr. Ethelred? The CEO? It had to be a mistake. CEOs didn't interview for junior positions. "Mr. Julian Ethelred," she clarified, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, that's correct," Amelia confirmed, oblivious to the shockwave she had just sent through Alara's world. "Shall I confirm you for 10? Somehow, she found her voice and agreed. The moment she hung up, a fresh wave of panic washed over her. An interview? With the CEO? She had nothing to wear but faded jeans and worn-out sweaters. And who would watch the twins? She called her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind, elderly woman who adored Leo and Lily, and practically begged her to watch them for a few hours, promising to pay her as soon as she could. Then she tore through her closet, finally finding a simple black dress from her life before children, a life that felt 1,000,000 years ago. It was tighter than she remembered, but it would have to do. The next morning, she walked into the lobby of Ethelred Tower, a gleaming monument of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky. The sheer scale of the place was designed to intimidate, to make one feel small and insignificant. It was working. She felt like an imposter, a fraud who had somehow slipped past security. Amelia greeted her with a polite smile and led her through corridors that hummed with quiet, focused energy. They stopped before a set of imposing mahogany doors. "Mr. Ethelred will be right with you," she said, before disappearing as silently as she had arrived. Alara took a deep breath, her hands clammy. This was it. She smoothed down her dress for the 10th time and tried to remember the confident, capable person she had described in her cover letter. The doors opened, and a man stood there, silhouetted against a vast window that offered a panoramic view of the city. He stepped forward into the light, and Alara's breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. The face was older, sharper, etched with a seriousness she didn't recognize. The shoulders were broader, filling out the impeccably tailored suit. But the eyes were the same. A deep, stormy gray that held a familiar flicker of melancholy. It was him, Julian, the boy from her college art history class, the intense, brilliant young man with whom she had shared one whirlwind, unforgettable summer before he had vanished from her life without a single word. He seemed just as stunned to see her. His professional composure dissolved, replaced by a raw, unguarded shock. "Alara," he breathed, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't place. "Julian," she whispered back, the name feeling foreign and yet intimately familiar on her tongue. All the questions, all the hurt and confusion she had buried for years, rushed to the surface. He gestured numbly for her to enter, his movements stiff and uncertain. His office was vast and minimalist, more art gallery than workspace. She sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car, feeling utterly out of her depth. The power dynamic was a chasm between them. He was Julian Ethelred, CEO and titan of industry. She was Alara Vance, desperate single mother on the verge of eviction. "I saw your resume," he began, his voice regaining some of its command, though his eyes still held that flicker of disbelief. "Your portfolio, it's exceptional." "Thank you," she said, her voice small. "This wasn't an interview. This was something else entirely. I didn't know it was you. The name, I never made the connection. My father's company," he said simply, as if that explained everything. He looked down at her resume, though she knew he wasn't reading it. "You have children," it wasn't a question. She stiffened, her protective instincts flaring. "Yes, twins, Leo and Lily." A complicated expression crossed his face, something akin to pain, or maybe regret. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. "I'm offering you the job, Alara." She blinked. "Just like that? You haven't asked me a single question." "I don't need to," he said, turning back to face her. "I know your work ethic. I know your talent. The salary in the listing. I'm doubling it. And there will be a signing bonus. Enough to get you settled." The room seemed to tilt. Double the salary? A signing bonus? It was too much. It was charity disguised as a job offer. The old hurt, the sting of his abandonment, mingled with her current desperation, creating a toxic cocktail of suspicion and resentment. "Why, Julian? Why are you doing this?" "Because you're the best candidate for the job," he said, his voice flat, his gaze unreadable. She didn't believe him for a second, but she looked at the eviction notice burned into her memory, pictured the faces of her sleeping children, and knew she had no choice. "I accept," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The first week was a blur. The signing bonus appeared in her bank account, a staggering sum that made her weep with relief. She paid her rent, her bills, and bought a month's worth of groceries and diapers without once having to check her balance. Julian's assistant arranged for her to move into a spacious, fully furnished corporate apartment just 10 minutes from the office. The building had a state-of-the-art daycare center on the ground floor, which Julian informed her the company would be covering entirely. Every act of generosity felt like a gilded cage, tightening around her. She was grateful, deeply and painfully so, but she was also deeply suspicious. Julian was a constant, hovering presence. He assigned her to a major project, a rebranding campaign for their flagship product, insisting he oversee it personally. This meant daily meetings in his office, long evenings working side by side, and a proximity that was both unnerving and strangely magnetic. He was different from the boy she had known. The easy laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. He was commanding, decisive, respected by everyone in the company. But sometimes, when he looked at her, she saw a flicker of the old Julian, the vulnerable artist who had quoted poetry and sketched her portrait in a worn leather-bound book. He remembered things she had long forgotten, that she preferred tea to coffee, that her favorite color was a specific shade of cerulean blue, that she always hummed when she was concentrating. It was this intimate knowledge that unnerved her the most. It felt like he was trying to rebuild a bridge she had thought was burned to the ground. Her pride warred with her pragmatism. She needed this job. Her children needed this stability. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was a pawn in a game she didn't understand. The breaking point came one rainy Thursday evening. They were the last two people in the office, finalizing a presentation for the board. Leo had a fever, and she was anxious to get home. "We're almost done," Julian said softly, noticing her distraction. "You've done incredible work on this, Alara." "It's my job," she replied coolly, avoiding his gaze. "It's more than that," he insisted, his voice gentle. "You've brought a life to this project that no one else could have." That was it. The quiet praise, the feigned normalcy, it was all too much. She spun around in her chair to face him, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. "Stop it, Julian. Just stop." He looked taken aback. "Stop what?" "This. All of this," she cried, gesturing around the opulent office. "The job, the obscene salary, the apartment, the daycare. Don't pretend this is about my work. What is this, Julian? A guilt payment? Are you trying to buy my forgiveness for walking out on me all those years ago without so much as a goodbye?" His face paled, the accusation hitting its mark. He sank into the chair opposite her. The powerful Seo was suddenly looking like a lost boy. For a long moment, he just stared at his hands, his jaw tight. "You deserve an explanation," he said finally, his voice low and strained. "You deserved one 8 years ago." He looked up, and the raw pain in his eyes silenced the angry retort on her lips. "I didn't just leave, Alara. I was taken away." He took a deep, shuddering breath before he continued. "The last night I saw you. You remember we went to see that old French film? After I dropped you off, I started the drive home. My father called. He was angry I was out so late, that I was distracted. He told me to come to his office downtown immediately. We argued." Julian's voice cracked, and he paused, wrestling with a memory that was clearly still raw. There was a storm that night, like tonight. The roads were slick. A truck ran a red light. I woke up in a hospital in Switzerland 2 weeks later. The car, it was totaled. My father, he didn't make it." Alara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. "Oh, Julian, I had no idea. I had a severe head injury," he went on, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, as if he were reciting facts from a report. "Multiple fractures. My mother, in her grief, blamed me, blamed us. She said my art, my distraction with you, had killed my father. She took my phone, my laptop. She cut off all contact. I was in rehab for almost a year, learning to walk again, trying to piece my memory back together. By the time I was physically and mentally capable of finding you, I was a different person. I was the head of a global corporation I never wanted. I felt broken, and I was ashamed. I thought so much time had passed, that you would have moved on, that you would hate me for my silence." He finally met her gaze, his own eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I never stopped thinking about you, Alara. Not for a single day. I set up a search alert on our HR system years ago, for your name, your college, just on the 1,000,000 to 1 chance. When your resume came through, I thought I was hallucinating. I saw it as a sign, a second chance I didn't deserve. So, yes," he admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "All of this, the job, the apartment, it wasn't charity. It was a selfish, clumsy attempt to get you back in my life. I'm so sorry, Alara, for everything." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and transformative. The years of bitterness and confusion she had carried dissolved into a profound wave of empathy. He hadn't abandoned her. He had been shattered, stolen away by a tragedy she couldn't have imagined. She reached across the desk and placed her hand over his. His skin was cold. "You should have told me," she said softly, her own tears now falling freely. "I know," he whispered. "I was a coward." From that night on, everything changed. The suspicion between them was replaced by a fragile, tentative trust. They started to rebuild their connection, not as the ghosts of who they were in college, but as the people they were now. Julian was gentle and patient, never pushing, but always there. He started visiting her apartment in the evenings, under the guise of dropping off work files, but he always stayed to read a story to the twins or help her assemble a new toy. Leo and Lily, who were shy around most strangers, adored him instantly, their chubby hands reaching for him, their giggles filling the rooms of the home he had given them. For the first time in a very long time, Elara felt safe. She allowed herself to lean on him, to share the burdens she had carried alone for so long. And as she watched him on the floor, making silly faces at her children, she felt the stirrings of something she had thought was long dead: hope. Their newfound peace, however, was short-lived. A shadow from Julian's past was looming, and his name was Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a former partner whom Julian's father had forced out of the company years ago over a bitter patent dispute. He had since started a rival firm and harbored a deep, obsessive grudge against the Ethelred name. The first sign of trouble was subtle. A major client unexpectedly pulled out of a lucrative contract, citing a security breach. Then, proprietary designs for a new product were leaked online, sending the company's stock plummeting. A quiet panic began to ripple through the executive floor. Julian grew tense and withdrawn, spending late nights in meetings with his security and legal teams. Elara, now a trusted member of the creative team, was deeply involved in the compromise project. As she reviewed the leaked design files, her sharp eye caught something no one else had: a minute detail in the digital watermark. It was almost identical to their own, but the hex code for the gray was off by a single digit, a shade lighter. It was a sloppy mistake, but one only a designer would likely notice. She dug deeper, pulling up the original files from their secure server and comparing them to the leaked versions. She found other inconsistencies, subtle changes in typography, misaligned elements in the branding guide. It was sabotage, and it was clever. Someone on the inside had created near-perfect forgeries and swapped them out. She brought her findings to Julian immediately. He listened intently, his expression grim. "This confirms our suspicions," he said. "We have a mole, and they're trying to make it look like our own internal security is a mess." The situation escalated dramatically a few days later. Julian called her into his office. His face was ashen. On his desk was a printout of an internal security report. "They found the source of the leak," he said, his voice strained. "The files were transferred from a workstation on the creative floor. They were sent from your computer, Elara." The accusation hung in the air, cold and sharp. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. "What? That's impossible. I would never." "I know," he cut in, his voice fierce and immediate. "I know you didn't do it. You're being framed." The board of directors, however, was not so convinced. Panicked by the falling stock prices and the threat of lawsuits, they demanded Julian fire her immediately and hand her name over to the authorities. The pressure was immense. "They want a scapegoat," Julian told her later that night, his fists clenched. "And Marcus is feeding them information, stoking the fire. He's trying to force me out, trigger a hostile takeover." "Then let them fire me," Elara said, her heart aching. "I won't let you lose your company because of me." "Never," he said, stepping closer and taking her hands in his. His stormy gray eyes were filled with a protective fire. "I lost you once, Elara. I will not lose you again. We are going to fight this. Together." That word, together, was a promise and a shield. They worked tirelessly, combining his resources with her insight. Julian's security team set up a covert monitoring system while Elara went back to the files, convinced the saboteur had left another clue. She thought about the specific shade of gray, the tiny digital fingerprint. It felt personal. "A forger always has a tell," she murmured, staring at her screen late one night in Julian's office. "A detail they can't resist, something that's part of their signature." She started researching Marcus Thorne, digging into his past work, his design philosophy. She found articles and interviews from his early career, long before he became a cutthroat CEO. In an old design school publication, she found what she was looking for: an interview where Thorne boasted about his perfect gray, a custom shade he used in all his early projects. He even listed the hex code. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She cross-referenced it. It was a perfect match to the code in the forged watermark. It was his signature. He had been so arrogant, so sure no one would notice, that he had literally signed his crime. It was the digital smoking gun they needed. The next day, Marcus Thorne walked into the Ethelred Innovations boardroom to present his hostile takeover bid to the board. He was smug, confident, certain of his victory. Julian let him speak, let him lay out his vision for a new era for the company, free from the incompetent leadership that had allowed such catastrophic security breaches. When he was finished, Julian stood up. An impressive presentation, Marcus. But your data is flawed. He nodded to Alara, who stood at the side of the room. With a steady voice, she walked the board through her discovery. She projected the forged files next to Thorne's early work, highlighting the identical hex codes. She presented server logs provided by Julian's team that showed the mole, a junior designer Thorne had bribed, uploading the doctored files from Alara's workstation while she was at lunch. The evidence was irrefutable. The color drained from Marcus Thorne's face. His smugness evaporated, replaced by pure panic. The board members stared at him, their expressions a mixture of shock and fury. Security was called. The meeting ended not with a takeover, but with Marcus Thorne being escorted from the building in disgrace. The boardroom emptied, leaving only Alara and Julian standing in the quiet aftermath. The adrenaline of the confrontation still pulsed through her veins. Julian crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping directly in front of her. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe and admiration. "You saved my company." "We did it," she corrected softly. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "When I thought they might take you away from me. Alara, these past few months, having you and the twins in my life, it's been like waking up after a long, dark dream. I haven't just been running a company. I've been hiding from the grief, from the guilt. You brought the light back in. I love you, Alara Vance. I think I've loved you since the first day I saw you in that dusty lecture hall." Tears welled in her eyes as the words she had once longed to hear finally filled the space between them. "I love you too, Julian," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was not about the past or the trauma that had separated them, but about the future they would build together. It was a kiss full of promise, relief, and the profound certainty of coming home. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed into the kitchen of their beautiful home, illuminating the happy chaos within. Leo and Lily, now energetic toddlers, chased each other around the large wooden table, their laughter echoing through the house. Alara, now the head creative director for Ethelred Innovations, smiled as she poured juice into their sippy cups. She wore a simple sundress, her feet bare on the warm floor. Julian entered the kitchen, his suit and tie from yesterday discarded in favor of soft jeans and a t-shirt. He scooped Lily into his arms, peppering her face with kisses, which sent her into a fit of giggles. He was no longer the wounded, solitary CEO who lived in a sterile penthouse. He was a father, a partner. He was happy. He came to stand behind Alara, wrapping his free arm around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Good morning," he murmured into her ear. "Good morning," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. She glanced down at her left hand, at the elegant, understated engagement ring that rested on her finger. She thought back to that desperate, terrifying night when she had sat in her dark, cramped apartment, staring at an eviction notice. She remembered the hopeless feeling as she had clicked submit on that long-shot job application, a final, desperate act that felt more like a surrender than a plan. It was astonishing to think how her moment of greatest crisis had become the catalyst for her greatest joy. Fate, she mused, had a strange and beautiful way of writing itself. It had taken a tragedy to tear them apart, but it had taken a different kind of desperation, a mother's fierce love, to bring them back together and build the one thing they had both been missing, a family.